The wedding hall in Dayton, Texas, fell silent the moment Sarah walked in. Her handmade dress was clean but plain, and her old shoes squeaked on the shiny floor. The groom's mother, Mrs. Collins, crossed her arms and whispered, "She doesn't belong with us." People nearby laughed quietly. Sarah smiled through the humiliation, pretending not to hear. She had worked for months to make this day possible, but every face in that hall reminded her she didn't fit their world. What none of them knew was that the truth about who really belonged here was about to shatter everything. That morning, Sarah woke in her small apartment, ironing her wedding dress on a wooden table. The fabric had tiny imperfections, but it was hers, stitched during late nights after work. She looked in the mirror and told herself she didn't need fancy things to be happy. Her friend had warned her that marrying into a rich family would be hard, but Sarah believed love could overcome pride. She placed her father's old silver cross around her neck and whispered a quiet prayer, unaware that this day would test her strength in ways she'd never imagined. Her best friend Lila arrived with breakfast, trying to lighten the mood. She joked that Mrs. Collins probably had napkins worth more than Sarah's rent. Sarah laughed nervously, but stayed positive. She said she wasn't marrying a family. She was marrying Evan, the man who loved her. Outside, rain clouds gathered over Dayton, but Sarah told herself it was good luck. She packed her simple dress and makeup into a tote bag, avoiding any second thoughts. She believed, once they saw how much she loved their son, they'd accept her. But she was wrong. The Collins family arrived at the venue in luxury cars, their presence loud and polished. Guests turned their heads as designer perfume filled the air. Sarah's parents, dressed simply, stood awkwardly near the entrance. Mrs. Collins glanced at Sarah once and turned away, muttering that the wedding looked cheap. Her husband gave a weak smile, not wanting to cause a scene. Sarah tried to focus on Evan, who looked nervous but supportive. Still, she couldn't shake the sinking feeling that she was being judged from every corner of the room. While helping arrange the flowers, Sarah overheard Mrs. Collins talking to a group of guests. She said her son could have married someone better. Someone from our circle. The laughter that followed was soft but sharp. Sarah's hands trembled as she fixed a ribbon on a chair. Her mother noticed and tried to comfort her, but Sarah just smiled, pretending it didn't matter. Inside, her confidence began to crack. For the first time, she wondered if her love story was a mistake, one built on hope, not belonging. As the ceremony started, Sarah walked down the aisle with her heart pounding. She noticed Mrs. Collins refusing to meet her eyes. Every step felt heavier, not from nerves, but from the quiet disapproval that surrounded her. When the officiant asked the families to come together for a photo, Mrs. Collins stayed seated, claiming she didn't want to ruin her makeup. Guests exchanged glances. Sarah smiled tightly, her hands shaking as she held the bouquet. Love, she reminded herself, was stronger than pride, but pride was about to strike again. Dinner began with a grand toast from Mrs. Collins. Her words sounded polite, but the tone carried venom. She called Sarah humble and simple, words that drew awkward laughter from the tables. Sarah felt her face burn but stayed silent. She wanted to believe this would pass, that people would see her sincerity. Evan squeezed her hand under the table, but she noticed how even he looked uncomfortable. The woman who should have welcomed her as a daughter had turned her wedding into a performance of humiliation. Sarah's parents sat quietly at their corner table, avoiding eye contact with anyone. They had sacrificed so much to raise her with dignity, and now they sat watching her be mocked. Her father clenched his jaw, while her mother wiped a tear discreetly. Across the hall, Lila recorded short clips, uneasy but determined to document what was happening. Sarah forced a smile through the dinner, holding her breath, every time another guest whispered about her dress or her family. The evening that should have been magical was becoming unbearable. When Sarah rose to thank the guests, Mrs. Collins interrupted, saying loudly, "She doesn't belong with us." The room went silent for a moment, then filled with nervous laughter. Sarah froze, her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Her mother-in-law's words hung heavy in the air. Evan looked stunned, but said nothing either, trying to calm his mother with a look that failed to work. Sarah sat down quietly, her appetite gone, her spirit shrinking under the weight of judgment. She excused herself, walking quickly to the restroom. Inside, she stared at her reflection, makeup smeared, eyes wet. She tried to breathe, whispering, "It's fine, just one night." But deep down, something broke. The shame wasn't just about words, it was about being treated as less. She wondered if she'd made a mistake, choosing a life where she'd always be reminded she didn't belong. The sound of laughter from the hall echoed through the door, each laugh stabbing deeper than the last. Evan knocked on the restroom door, asking if she was okay. Sarah said she needed a minute. He stood outside, silently, guilt pressing down on him. When she came out, she forced a smile, and he promised to handle things. But as they walked back in, Mrs. Collins was already surrounded by guests, loudly talking about gold diggers and status. Sarah sat down quietly, each insult layering like bricks around her heart. Her silence became her only defense. As the music played softly, Mrs. Collins continued to brag about her family's reputation. She mentioned how hard it was to maintain standards when others bring different backgrounds. Guests nodded, pretending not to notice Sarah's tears. Evan clenched his fists under the table. He realized that his silence was protecting the wrong person. He had promised Sarah a life built on equality and respect. But tonight proved he had failed her. Something in his eyes changed as he looked at his mother. Mrs. Collins raised her glass again, trying to lighten the mood by joking about Sarah's thrift store wedding ring. The laughter that followed made Sarah's chest tighten. This time, Evan didn't stay quiet. He stood up, his voice calm but firm, and said he had something to tell everyone. The chatter died instantly. Sarah looked at him, confused, as he took a deep breath and prepared to expose the truth he'd been hiding for months. Evan began by thanking everyone for coming, then said the entire wedding, venue, food, flowers, wasn't paid for by his family. It was paid for by Sarah. The room gasped. Mrs. Collins blinked, speechless. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. Evan continued, saying his business had collapsed months ago. He had been too ashamed to admit it, even to his own mother. Sarah had stepped in quietly, working extra hours, saving every penny, and paying for the entire event. The hall was silent now. Evan's voice shook as he described how Sarah had sold her late father's old truck just to help him get back on his feet. He said she never told anyone because she didn't want pity, she just wanted to see him succeed. Guests stared in disbelief. The same people who mocked her now looked away. Ashamed, Mrs. Collins opened her mouth but couldn't find words. The mask of pride she wore all evening began to crumble. Evan turned toward his mother and said Sarah was the reason his business was alive again. She was the real partner, not someone looking for wealth. He revealed that once his business recovered, he made Sarah a co-owner because she had earned it. Murmurs spread across the room. People glanced between them, realizing how wrong they'd been. Sarah stood frozen, her tears no longer from shame but from relief and disbelief. Mrs. Collins tried to laugh it off, saying Evan was exaggerating. But when he showed proof, a document folder he'd kept hidden, her smile faded. Sarah had unknowingly signed part of the paperwork months ago when helping him with some forms. The company's success was built on that act of faith. Evan said everything he had belonged to both of them now. The room filled with an uneasy silence as truth replaced gossip. Evan's father finally spoke, apologizing publicly to Sarah. He said he was proud of her for saving his son's future. Mrs. Collins' eyes filled with tears, but not from joy. Her pride was breaking apart. For years she had looked down on others for their lack of wealth, and now the poorest girl she had ever judged had become her family's foundation. Sarah didn't say much. She simply thanked Evan for being honest. Her voice was soft but steady. She looked around at the people who had laughed earlier and saw their faces now painted with guilt. The whispers had stopped. She walked out of the hall for fresh air, needing space to breathe after the emotional storm that just passed. Mrs. Collins followed her outside, tears falling silently. She tried to speak but couldn't. Sarah turned to her and said she didn't want revenge or apologies, just respect. Her calmness made the apology even heavier. Mrs. Collins nodded, realizing too late how cruel her behavior had been. The night air was cold, but for the first time Sarah felt free. Inside, guests began to talk, not with gossip but admiration. They called Sarah brave and selfless. Some approached her parents to apologize for how they were treated earlier. Lila deleted the earlier clips of humiliation and replaced them with ones showing Sarah standing tall, wiping away her tears as Evan defended her. Evan joined Sarah outside, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. He said he should have spoken sooner. But she stopped him. "You did when it mattered," she said quietly. They stood together under the soft lights of the parking lot, the tension melting into peace. For the first time that night, Sarah smiled without pretending. The next morning, photos from the wedding began circulating online. Instead of mocking her dress, people praised Sarah's story of loyalty and love. Posts went viral calling her the bride who stood tall. Mrs. Collins read the comments in silence, realizing her reputation as a socialite meant nothing compared to Sarah's grace. Evan's company received an unexpected boost. People admired his honesty and Sarah's strength. New investors reached out, and within months the business grew stronger than before. Yet despite the success, Sarah stayed humble. She continued volunteering at the local shelter, the same place she once donated her extra wages to before marriage. At family gatherings, Mrs. Collins treated Sarah differently. She often asked for her opinion, invited her parents over, and made sure no one ever disrespected her again. The change wasn't instant, but it was real. She had learned humility through the one woman she least expected to teach it. One evening, as Sarah and Evan sat on their porch, she told him she no longer feared not belonging. "Because I built my own place here," she said. Evan smiled, proud of her courage. They watched the sunset, knowing that their story wasn't about money or class, it was about resilience and truth. Months later, the same guests who once whispered now invited Sarah to speak at community events. She shared her story, encouraging others to never be ashamed of their background. Her voice carried the quiet power of someone who had endured judgment and turned it into strength. Mrs. Collins often stood in the back during those speeches, tears in her eyes. She had once thought belonging came from wealth and status, but Sarah showed her it came from integrity. Their relationship became one of mutual respect, not obligation. Years later, Sarah looked at her wedding photo, hanging in their living room. She no longer saw the sadness from that day, only proof that love, honesty, and humility can outshine any insult. The pain had turned into purpose, and the girl who didn't belong became the heart of the family that once rejected her. If this story about respect and redemption touched your heart, consider subscribing for more.